Hello, this is Idodmg and welcome back to the channel. In this Diablo 4 video, I want to talk to you about the Necromancer build that I've put probably the most time into in Season 4 Loot Reborn. This Necromancer build, I enjoy it and I can't wait to talk about it with you today. It is going to be based around Desecrated Ground. Desecrated Ground is not an actual skill that you can slot onto your hotbar. It's not even on the skill tree. Sacred Ground is actually tied to 3 different abilities in the game, and you can make Desecrated Ground work by using these items. The very first one is whenever you use Sever, there's unique boots in the game you can get. That whenever you cast Sever, there will be Desecrated Ground underneath there. And then you also have Blood Mist, which is a blood ability, obviously, which some people use in their builds because it does give you full immunity while you're in this ability. But while you're in Blood Mist, you make a trail of Desecrated Ground. This one's really great because you can kind of draw on the ground in a sense of where you want the damage area to be, the Desecrated Ground to be at. And thirdly, you can also have Blood Wave cast Desecrated Ground and make it a shadow skill as well, which will tie in with a bunch of different abilities and everything that we're going to talk about in the video here. But that Blood Wave also has really good synergy where it ties up with the legendary aspect, where Blood Wave can actually cast 2 additional times. So you're actually casting 3 of the Desecrated Ground Blood Waves, and there's so much more synergies with this build, and I can't wait to just go over all of it with you. Before we jump into all the nitty-gritty here, and before you decide if this is a build you want to pursue and check out, let's go ahead and kind of talk about the play style of the build here as well. I went ahead and jumped into a Helltide just to kind of showcase this build a little bit here. So this is pretty much what your build's going to look like. And pretty much going to be your full rotation here is you're going to cast your Blood Wave, which will cast that Desecrated Ground, and it will cast 3 times. And each of those Blood Waves also spawn a Blood Orb as well, which you can see here. So there's 9 Blood Orbs that are going to be spawned once per Blood Wave cast, basically. What you can see when I pick those up, it reduces my ultimate cooldown, which is Blood Wave. It's your ultimate ability. Now watch the cooldown on this thing as we pick up these Blood Orbs here. Boom, we can already cast it again. That's really the bread and butter of the build here, but there is quite a bit more to it, but that's going to be most of your gameplay here. Once you get into like the higher pit levels and stuff where you're going to be taking damage, boss fights, things like that, that's when you're going to be casting your Blood Wave. I usually let it roll 3 times, and then I'll go into my Blood Mist so that I'm immune in the boss fights. And then that also casts a second or a separate instance of Desecrated Ground, and they do stack. The Blood Wave and Blood Mist does stack, and same with Sever as well. So if you want to get your Blood Wave, Blood Mist, and then you can Sever like if you're on a boss or something like that. But the majority of the time is going to be you casting Blood Wave, picking up all the Blood Orbs, rinsing, and repeating. Now, there is one part that I kind of like and don't like about this build. Let me go ahead and show you here what I'm talking about. So this, you can obviously see when I cast Blood Wave, right? I have to be able to pick up those Blood Orbs in order for this build to function. Now, if I can't pick up those Blood Orbs, like if I were to cast Blood Wave incorrectly off the map or maybe even onto a wall, like I just did here, on purpose to show you, I don't get any Blood Orbs. And now what happens is I have to sit a 30-second cooldown. You will see in the video we're going to pick up some cooldown reduction and stuff to kind of help out when you get stuck into this scenario. And I don't know, I feel like maybe I could not go the cooldown reduction and just play more skillfully and not shoot my Blood Wave off the edge of the map. But while we're here, that's the other part of the build too, is going to be your Corpse Explosion. You can kind of free cast as well. You also have, when you're in your Blood Mist, that'll pop your Corpse Explosions as well. This is a shadow damage over time build, and I can't wait to talk about all of it here. One more final Blood Wave. Here we go. Boom. Get all those orbs. I absolutely love that cooldown reduction you can pull with all those Blood Orbs, and that is actually from a legendary aspect, but we are about to jump into all of it. I don't know. I find the build fun to just kind of keep throwing down that Blood Wave. And I guess I'm back in town now, but the other thing you're going to want to be doing while you're out killing monsters, you're going to be using your Curse to Crepify here. That'll be the other part of the build as well. But you can pretty much just use that every so many, 14 seconds. So it really is just that Blood Wave, picking up Blood Orbs and all of that. So that's pretty much what the build looks like and what Desecrated Ground actually is. I know when I very first started to mess with this build, I was trying to kind of Google Desecrated Ground, and there's not a lot of information since there's no real skill in the game for it. But the first thing I want to talk about here is going to be what you're looking for on your stats and your gear. Your three main stats that you're looking for on all your pieces of gear that you can possibly get it on. And I will have a link in the description below, obviously, to the D4 build planner. That's my preferred website I use for planning out builds. I'll have the link for it down there so you can check each item slot and exactly what kind of rolls you want to go for. But the three main stats you're going to be looking for is going to be your intelligence, maximum life, and damage over time. And you can even get damage over time as a tempered affix as well. We will cover, like I said, we will cover all of it in the video. If you've played Season 4, you already know this, but in Season 4, they've really kind of reduced the itemization down so you can really hone in and decide if an item's good or not, and then decide if you want to temper and craft it further and upgrade it further. So let's go ahead and talk about just the base items there. Like I said, you want your intelligence, max life, and damage over time. There's also some item slots that you can get ranks to corpse explosion on your chest, and then on your amulet you can get ranks to corpse skills, which would also ramp up that corpse damage ability as well, which is a damage over time ability since we've made it that in our skill tree that we'll talk about here in a little bit. The only other thing really is going to be your cooldown reduction on a couple different items as well. And then on your weapon, because I know that weapon's usually a special item in the game, is going to be intelligence, damage over time, and then you can go with your third affix. You can do, if you're good on survivability, or you're not, you're still kind of early in the game, I would go for damage, so int damage over time and damage. But as you push deeper into the pit and into the end game, you will need to probably switch out that damage for maximum life on your weapon. But yeah, you will be giving up damage if you're doing that. The other thing I wanted to point out here with these stats is damage over time and damage. If you go that route, they do stack as well. I tested it. They do stack. So that's why you'd want both on your weapon, obviously. So that's kind of for your base stats, what you're looking for. When it comes to your tempers, and I always recommend this, especially early on as well, when you're first starting out in an early end game, if you're having issues capping your resistances, you can use your tempers under the natural resistance category, and you can add on the resistance that you're lacking. Or if you don't want to waste tempers trying to get the exact one, don't forget you can switch out the gems on your jewelry. So let's say you roll lightning resistance on an item for a temper, but you're already overcapped. Make sure in your jewelry you don't have a topaz, I believe is lightning. You can switch out your resistances on your jewelry as well. But yeah, tempers is a good way to kind of make up for uncapped resistances, which will help you out early on, but as you find better gear, that should be less of an issue. Another temper you're going to want to go for is Blood Mist cooldown. This is early on, and I'm actually to the point in the end game where I need a lot of maximum life because I'm just getting one tap by bosses in the pit. So as you go on later into the end game, you'll probably want to get rid of that Blood Mist cooldown and pick up maximum life. You can also get Blood Mist duration if you want to. Personally, for me, I prefer to have cooldown because usually I actually break myself out of Blood Mist early just so I can lay down another Blood Wave. And so that's why I would prefer cooldown over duration on Blood Mist. But again, that decision's yours. That's just kind of my preference. A couple of other tempers you can get is your corpse explosion size. Or if you don't get lucky with that, you could settle for curse size as well. That'd be okay. And then another giant piece that you have to have, a temper you have to have for this build, is on your ring. And just one of the rings, you need to get Ultimate Restores Your Essence. Because we're always casting Blood Wave, which is always going to give us Essence. So you never have any real issues with Essence, and you're not going to need to stand there and free cast Decompose like you might see in some of the footage in the background. Another really, really strong temper for this build is going to be Desecrated Ground damage. And you can get this on a couple different pieces as well, and it really adds up and really ramps up the damage of that Blood Wave. But over on your weapon, you're going to be looking for Sever to double cast and shadow damage over time. Over on your Ami, that's where you can get that Desecrated Ground damage. And then, like I said, I'm now going into life, but you could pick some of the other options that we've discussed if you'd like to. And then on your offhand, I think that's worth mentioning. I do use a one-hander and an offhand. On the offhand, we go for shadow damage over time and Sever size. Now, if you remember, Sever is one of our sources of desecrated ground. So if we can increase the size of that Sever, you then have a larger area of desecrated ground, which is going to help you out, obviously, when you're in a big area and the monsters are all spread out and stuff. I know we've covered quite a bit here in the video, and I can't thank you enough for hanging out with us here today as we talk about the desecrated ground build for the Necromancer on Diablo 4. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget that like button, subscribe to the channel. Obviously, let's keep going, though. There's so much more I want to talk about here with this specific build. I had a lot of fun min-maxing it, and I'm having even more fun talking with you about it today. We've covered quite a bit here. We've covered the stats, we've covered tempers, we've covered kind of the gameplay. Let's go ahead and talk about your legendary aspects and your uniques. First, I want to actually kick this off talking about uniques. Another really important part of this build is going to be what unique items you choose. Now, there's a lot of uniques in the game, and I know for me, sometimes I'll go too heavy into uniques, and I'm missing out on really strong legendary aspects, so we're going to talk about all that for this build right now. The uniques, the very first one that I feel is required is your Greaves of the Empty Tome. This is what will allow you to cast Desecrated Ground with your Sever, is these boots. Honestly, those boots, Greaves of the Empty Tome, are like the only really, I feel, required unique for this build. Another item you can consider, and I'm only going to talk about this because I've been lucky enough to actually find a Harlequin crest, or a Shako as they've been called. Hopefully I'm saying that right. I don't even know. But the super rare helmet, if you've been following us along here, we got super lucky one of the nights and actually pulled one of these Shakos from, I believe it was Duriel. No, I actually got mine from Andariel. But anyway, the Shako's really nice, and it has damage reduction. It gives you +4 to all skills. It's a really, really juicy item if you're lucky enough to find one. However, don't worry, it's not really required for this build, although the damage reduction does help. So you got some decisions to make here. There's kind of two legendary aspects that if you are going to go with the Shako route, there's two legendary affixes that you'll have to kind of figure out what's better for you. We're going to be talking about Decay, which is going to increase your Shadow Blight damage, which is a key passive on our passive skill tree that we'll talk about here, which is obviously it's going to make you do more damage. The other option you have here is Explosive Mist. And what this does is this allows you to, whenever you go into Blood Mist, you consume corpses and cast Corpse Explosion while you're in Blood Mist, which is really good not only for just the Corpse Explosion part, but survivability as well, because this aspect also, whenever you consume a corpse, will reduce the cooldown on Blood Mist so you can get back into Blood Mist sooner, which is a massive part of survivability. So it kind of comes down to you, do you want the more damage or the more survivability? For me, I usually go the Blood Mist route. But recently I've quit using the Shako so I can actually use both of these aspects since they're both very, very good. Legendary aspects, these are very hard. These are very hard to really kind of figure out, but these are the ones I've settled on that I feel like are really good for this build and you definitely want to use. On your helmet, we already talked about Explosive Mist. You're going to want that one. That's going to be your Blood Mist triggering Corpse Explosion and then getting cooldown reduced whenever you detonate a corpse while you're in Blood Mist. And the next one is going to be Aspect of Hardened Bones. And I use this on every single Necromancer, and this is going to be just straight up damage reduction. The aspect is for you and your minions. We're not running minions, but you yourself still gain 25% damage reduction once you've found a maxed rolled aspect that you've salvaged or whatever. That's literally 25% damage reduction. That's pretty good. The other aspect is Aspect of Decay, and this is what buffs up your Shadow Blight damage. Let's just go ahead and talk about Shadow Blight real quick here since we've kind of been touching on it. So the way the Shadow Blight works, and this passive is really, really good for a Shadow build. What it does is Shadow Blight makes it so that Shadow damage will infect enemies with Shadow Blight for 2 seconds. Every 10th time that an enemy receives Shadow damage from you or your minions, while affected by Shadow Blight, they take an additional amount of shadow damage. This damage is increased by your damage over time bonus. Now, what this aspect will enable is it's just literally going to buff up the damage of that passive. This also stacks up to 5 times. You can get up to 225% increased damage for your Shadow Blight. Now, I know it's whenever you deal shadow damage, what you're always doing. Every time you hit an enemy, it is shadow damage in this build. There's no other type of damage in this build, just shadow. So it's going to happen all the time, and this will really ramp up your damage output. Aspect of Decay on your gloves. Now, down on your pants, this one you could probably switch out, but I always run Juggernaut's aspect just so I can make sure that I'm above the armor cap. But if you're early on and you found a really good armor roll on some items, perhaps you could move this around and pick out a different defensive legendary aspect if you want. But I'm a big fan of Juggernauts. And then our boot slots, that's for the legendary boots. Greaves of Damage Tomb we already talked about. You also have Tidal Aspect. What Tidal does is this is what allows your Blood Wave to fire 2 additional waves we talked about at the beginning of the video, and you know how super important that is because that enables the rest of these aspects to all synergize together. We also have Fast Blood over on our Ami, and this will make it so whenever you pick up a Blood Orb, it will reduce your ultimate cooldown by a certain amount. And I think on my Ami, it reduces my cooldown by 3.6 seconds per Blood Orb. And we always have 9 Blood Orbs out. Absolutely crazy. That's already literally resets our cooldown on our ultimate instantly. You have to have Fast Blood. On top of that, you also want to get Ultimate Shadow. This is going to be what turns your Blood Wave into Desecrated Ground. Obviously, that's the bread and butter of the build. You have to have that. You also have Blood Mist. Blood Mist is what makes your Blood Mist leave behind Desecrated Ground for 4 seconds. And on top of that, increases your movement speed in Blood Mist, which is really good for repositioning around the map as well. Especially on some of the harder bosses, you're just going to need that mobility and that survivability there that we get from Blood Mist. And on top of that, that's also one of our other sources of Desecrated Ground. Kind of makes sense, right? Last but not least, we have Aspect of Empowering Reaper. This one is really good. I think this one might get overlooked pretty frequently for a lot of necromancers. What this will do is whenever you hit an enemy or deal damage to an enemy with Sever, you have a chance to spawn a pool of Blight. And this Blight pool deals bonus damage. Now, this effect does have a 3-second cooldown. What Blight does is that is an actual ability over on the passive skill tree here. And this I see a lot of people use with like minions and stuff. Blight is just really good. Not only does it deal shadow damage, which synergizes up with everything, but on top of that, it slows enemies, which could synergize up with damage to slowed enemies, obviously. But the big thing here is you and your minions deal 20% increased damage to enemies that are in that pool of Blight. Now, again, we're not using minions, but you yourself gain that 20% damage increase. And this is an auto-cast ability, so you don't even have to have Blight on your toolbar for this to proc. And you're going to be using Sever anyway here and there. Like if you have a little bit of downtime, kind of your filler ability, makes perfect sense to have Blight on there. The other thing I want to point out with Blight is when you first get the skill, it's a pretty small area pool thing, and you can increase the size through tempering, though it's not one of my priorities, but keep in mind that is an option. The last little bit I want to talk about here for our gear is going to be your gems, of course. I go full rubies on all my armor for that maximum life. I wish I could go intelligence for the damage, but I have to have that maximum life. Those bosses in the pit just hit so hard. I go all rubies for maximum life, and then over on your jewelry slots, you can get the resistances that we talked about with how to get resistance scalp. We talked about that with the tempering. And then last but not least, over on your weapon, you can use the amethyst to give you a little bit more damage over time. Another option you could do is to go with ultimate damage, and you can get that from using a diamond. This one's kind of up to you. I like the damage over time because it's always up, but then again, our ultimate's always up as well. So I feel like they're pretty even in that regard, either your amethyst or diamond, damage over time or ultimate damage. I'll leave that choice up to you. Now, if you've ever played Necromancer on Diablo 4, you already know about this, but this is going to be your Book of the Dead. My goal this season was, when I originally started, I wanted to do a minion build, and then when I found out that was the meta, I said, well, we're going to try to see what we can do with no minions and kind of challenge ourselves a little bit. Anyway, this is the Book of the Dead, and here's what we're going to be doing over here on your warriors. You can choose your minion type, and then they come with like buffs or things that kind of make them special, or you can choose to sacrifice and not use that minion and gain a buff. So over on our skeletal warriors, we're going to go into Reapers, and we are going to do increased shadow damage. Makes sense. No more. We don't need to say any more about that. Over here on skeletal mages, we go into cold. You deal increased damage to vulnerable enemies. I don't know if that's necessarily the best one here, but I think out of all my options, it kind of was the best because we don't really overpower with damage over time. Yeah, it's not great, but that's what we went with. And then over here on golems, we sacrificed our blood golems for maximum life. Like I said at the beginning of the video, max life is one of the 3 stats that we're looking for. You can get it here. Another option is critical strike damage, but don't forget we're doing damage over time, and damage over time cannot crit on this game, so that one would be useless. The other option is attack speed, which we don't really need attack speed since we're primarily using the ultimate. So max life is clearly the winner here, and that's kind of your Book of the Dead here. Next up, I want to go ahead and kind of talk about the skill tree with the Necromancer. This is just how I have it set up, and well, let's kind of go through, and you can kind of pick the order if you want, but first you're going to want to go decompose. And what this is going to do, this is your free ability, basically. So this is like your, if you have nothing to cast, you don't know what to do, you're out of essence, something's on cooldown, everything's cursed, all the corpses have been exploded. This is your very, very last skill, and you really won't use this skill that much, but it is good for making enemies vulnerable and also generating corpses and essence. So I've tried to run the build without decompose, but then I find myself in awkward situations where it's like, man, I really wish I had that ability up right now. So decompose, you're going to go 5 points into there, and then these are going to be the 2 that make them vulnerable, all that fun stuff. And then when you're leveling up, you're going to want to go into sever next, because this is going to be the ability you're actually using. And we've talked quite a bit about sever, but what it's going to do is it damages enemies along the path, but it's the desecrated ground from the boots. That's the really big thing here. And then every 3rd cast of sever makes enemies vulnerable, which will synergize up that vulnerability damage we pointed out in the Book of the Dead. And then once you've gotten into sever, I would go down to corpse explosion. And the big thing here is making sure you're going up here to blighted corpse explosion. This is what's going to summon those big pools of damage over time, that miasma that's always ticking. And that's going to be what helps out with your Shadow Blight stacks as well. Once you've gone into corpse explosion, then I'd probably go into blood mist. That one we've talked about a lot as well. This is going to make you immune for 3 seconds, and it's also going to synergize up where over here is overpower. We don't really use that in this build, but blood mist leaves behind a corpse every 1 second, which synergizes up with our exploding corpse legendary aspect, I believe is what it's called. That will then detonate those corpses as well. And then you have your shadow damage. It just all comes together really, really nice. And then after that, you know, obviously you want to get down to your blood wave as soon as you possibly can, because that's like your biggest damaging ability. That's your ultimate ability here. And then it will slow, and then you can also make it leave behind the blood orbs. So you have to go into the supreme blood wave node. You have to for this build to work. That's what those blood orbs are, and that's how we're resetting that cooldown so quick with all those legendary aspects. But you have to have this node in order for that to work. And then on your key passives here, we have Shadow Blight. We've talked a lot about this, another great source of damage. And the other 2 abilities that I kind of skipped through, so that'd be the order I would go in if I was leveling a new Necro. And then the icing on the cake, or whatever you want to call it here, would be your Blight for that autocast. And it is a good source of damage, but the bigger thing here is really that 20% damage increase to enemies that are standing in Blight. But it is a good source of damage as well. And again, this will autocast off sever, so we don't even have it on our bar down here. We also have Decrepify. The big thing with this one is you curse enemies, and you can get cooldown reduction. But on top of that, the enemies that are cursed deal less damage, which helps out a lot with survivability. And the cooldown thing is really nice as well. The cooldown part of this is a lucky hit chance, so it's not that massive, although it is nice. And then for our more passive abilities here, we're going to be looking at Grim Harvest. Whenever you consume a corpse, you generate 6 essence. That's partially why we don't really ever need to use Decompose. And then you can also get Standalone, where you get a damage reduction if you have no minions. Each active minion you have reduces the bonus by 2%. We don't have any minions. We're getting the full benefit here. And then we go over here and pick up Memento. This just increases the sacrifice bonus. These last 3 points here in the Memento are kind of play around points. You don't really have to use these 3. You could go up here and put them where whenever you consume a corpse, you deal more damage. There's different options that you can look around and kind of check out. I think there's one that gives you like movement speed, max essence. Oh yeah, down here in shadow, you can get movement speed. There's different options you can do. Those three are kind of play around points, especially early on. Although it does, I feel like, help out with some of those sacrificial buffs. So that's your skill tree. Let's go ahead and just touch on the Paragon board here real quick. We're just going to kind of go through. We're not going to go over every single node, obviously. Again, I have the build planner up, and the Paragon boards are in there, so you can just copy it if you want to. The very first glyph we're going to use here is going to be Undaunted. Every 5 willpower purchased within your range will increase your damage while you're fortified. With this, in this build, you're pretty much going to always have Fortify, and Fortify works in a weird way where your health globe turns to like this faint red, which is your Fortify, but you're not truly fortified until your health is lower than your amount of Fortify that you have. So you may have Fortify, but you're not really truly fortified until your health is below, which is shown on your health globe. It's the big thing that goes around the health globe. It's kind of a weird mechanic, so it's not up 100% of the time, but when it is, it works. And then the second part of this is that damage reduction, the more Fortify you have. So that Fortify you have, that's always up as long as you have Fortify on your health bar. That's going to be our first glyph. And then our very first Paragon board here is going to be Wither. What Wither does is it makes it so your shadow damage over time effects have a chance to deal bonus damage each time that they tick. The chance is increased by 1%, and bonus damage is increased for each 60 intelligence you have. So this is why intelligence is really good. Obviously, it's our primary stat as well. But again, this is our damage over time stuff here. And then we're also going to pick up, this is a really good board because you can pick up shadow damage. You can pick up more shadow damage. You can pick up more shadow damage. Well, this is actually damage to shadow damage over time affected enemies. That's really wordy. Basically, you deal 20% more damage to everything. And the other one here is more shadow damage over time. And then our legendary as well. And the glyph I chose here was Darkness. This will increase your shadow damage. You're probably seeing a trend here. Also, whenever you or your minions deal shadow damage to an enemy, that enemy does reduce damage up to 10%. So 10% damage reduction from that Darkness glyph. The next board I went into over here was Flesh Eater. Consuming 5 corpses grants 40% damage for 6 seconds. Pretty good. Not the best, but it is pretty good. And then this board, I don't think this board was like that crazy. I think this was like more damage, crit damage, which we don't even do really. So this board wasn't that impressive, honestly, but yeah, it is what it is. Next glyph we got was Scourge. This will increase your shadow damage over time, and you deal 10% more damage to enemies that are affected by your shadow damage over time. Someone count how many times have I said shadow damage or shadow damage over time? I swear, dude. The next board we're going to pick is going to be Scent of Death. With at least 2 corpses nearby, you gain damage reduction. Damage reduction is another thing, too. That would be probably one of the top like secondary stats. And then if there's no corpses, you deal increased damage. It's just a win-win. And the glyph we go with here is going to be Exhumation. I don't think I said that correctly, but that's what it is. Every 5 intelligence within range will increase your corpse skills damage. Here, this is for your corpse explosion. Damage is increased. And also, whenever you consume a corpse, it fortifies you. Remember, fortify earlier? Lots of synergy here. In this board, I don't really remember. Corpse damage. I don't really remember I don't think there's anything good really on this board. That's pretty much just for the glyph and that Scent of Death. And then our last Paragon board here. And we don't even use the legendary node. I would like to. I need to kind of fidget around. Maybe I should switch these 2 boards so that I can actually, this would be more beneficial, I believe. But it is Blood Begets Blood. Blood Orbs grant 5% increased damage up to 15, so you could get a 15% damage boost, which would always be up because we're always picking up Blood Orbs. I probably will rework this, but this is the next board we went with, and this one is your Blood Orbs give you damage. Nothing too crazy in the little rare nodes, but really it was just to get to the Desecrated Ground Glyph. of course, we're going with that glyph, right? It's Desecrated Ground build. Increases Desecrated Ground damage. And then also, while you're standing in your Desecrated Ground, you deal 15% increased shadow damage. Shadow damage, shadow damage, shadow damage. That's the name of the build. Maybe I should just name the build Shadow. I don't know. I know we've covered a lot in this video, and I can't thank you enough for hanging out here. We covered the gameplay and how the whole gameplay really kind of comes together and plays at the very beginning of the video. We'll have some gameplay running here while we wrap this up for you. And once you've watched the video all the way to the end, because you're that awesome, you could watch the beginning segment again where we kind of break down the gameplay and mechanics. I really tried to keep this video as short as possible, but there's so much to cover in this video. At the end of the day, the Desecrated Ground Necromancer has been really amazing for me. It's been really fun to min-max and try to squeeze every little ounce out of this build. The first 2-3 days of the season, I was doing minions, and I was extremely bored, and trying to figure out this build has brought me a lot of just entertainment value from Diablo 4 this season. And I love it. And hopefully you enjoyed sitting here hanging out and talking about this build with me today. That's going to wrap it up for this Diablo 4 Necromancer Desecrated Ground build guide video. If you found this video useful and or entertaining, don't forget that like button and subscribe to the channel for more action RPG videos. The best way to help support me and my family is by becoming a YouTube member today or leaving a super thanks down below on the video. Your view alone means the absolute world. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.